In 2005, Bayside were rapidly becoming one of the cult heroes of the punk and emo scene. They had two excellent albums under their belt, a stable lineup, and legions of fans across the country, even around the world. But by the end of the year, tragedy would have ripped the band apart. It would claim the life of one of their members, their friend and brother, and it would bring the remaining members of Bayside to their knees. This event would have broken most bands, but Bayside chose another path. They would rise from the ashes, turn their pain into power, turn their loss into resilience, and they would build a career that truly honored their fallen friend. This is the story of how Bayside experienced unimaginable tragedy and came out the other side. Before tragedy struck, Bayside were busy carving out a name for themselves in the Queens NYC punk and emo scene. The band's story begins in 2000, when Anthony Ranieri, Vinny DeReo, Chris Jackson, and Mike Kozak got together to form a punk and emo group. Chris had been in bands like The Show-Offs and Waste Management, while the others were pretty inexperienced. Still, they had plenty of ambition to make up for that. The name kind of came about by accident, while they were on their way to a drive-thru record showcase. Preparing to hand their demo CD to New Found Glory, the band realized they didn't have anything to call themselves. Driving past Bayside train station in Queens, they decided that name would do for now. They quickly wrote it in Sharpie on their demo CD, kinda liked it, and decided to stick with it for almost a quarter century and counting. The plan to hand the demo to New Found Glory was unsuccessful, but that CD still got them noticed. Dying Wish Records signed the band, and Bayside put out the Long Story Short EP in 2001. Anyone who heard that EP, or who caught them on those early shows, was in for a treat. This was a band who knew exactly how to make emotive music. They knew how to combine the urgency of punk rock, the weight of post-hardcore, and the heartfelt connection of emo. No one was in any doubt that this band was going places, or almost no one at least. Chris Jackson wasn't so sure. He was replaced on bass by Andrew Elderbaum. And maybe Vinny DeReo wasn't sure either. He left too, to be replaced on drums by Dustin Roth, who then himself left and was replaced by Jason Enns. And then, yeah, you guessed it, Jason left to be replaced by Jim Mitchell. That's right, the band had only been together for a couple of years, and already they were undergoing a ton of lineup changes. Now only Anthony and Mike remained from the original lineup, and Mike was about to leave too. He was replaced by J.R. Manning on lead guitar, but only for a short time. Finally, Bayside found a bit of stability when they drafted in Jack O'Shea on guitar. While they were going through all this lineup turmoil, Bayside took a big step forward in their burgeoning career. They signed with Victoria Records in 2003, putting out their debut album Sirens and Condolences the following year. This record features Masterpiece, a stunningly angular post-hardcore track that kinda sounds like Thrice. If Thrice were fronted by Josh Caterer of the Smoking Popes or Dan Andriano of Alkaline Trio. So now Bayside had a strong fan base and an awesome debut album. What they needed now was a more stable lineup. Andrew Elderbaum left the band after that first record, but his replacement, Nick Ghanbarian, seemed like a much better fit. Perhaps now the band had a bass player who was going to stick around. Not long after this, Jim Mitchell announced he was leaving Bayside too. But in John Beats Holohan, they found someone who really got what the band was all about. Let's just recap where we're up to now. Of course, we've got Anthony Ranieri on lead vocals and second guitar. We've got Jack O'Shea on lead guitar and backing vocals, and now we've got a rhythm section of Nick Ghanbarian and John Holohan. Now everything was looking great. They finally had the core unit that would help them take over the world, and they had a new album on the way. The self-titled follow-up was released in August 2005 and was immediate proof that this band was something special. The rich, dark textures of the first album and the fine balance of hardcore weight and indie pop melody are in full force on the second. But everything just feels a little more self-assured, like the band have finally found their feet. Maybe they were all just a little older and wiser, or maybe they just felt stable in their lineup for the first time. Whatever the reason, the album feels like a watershed moment, and tracks like Devotion and Desire and Montauk are prime slices of mid-2000s post-hardcore. They weren't the biggest band on the scene. They were never going to be MCR or Fall Out Boy. But who cares? They weren't out to be pop stars. They were out to make their own sound and connect with their audiences their way. They were true scene underdogs, and if you were clued up enough to be into Bayside back in the day, you could consider that a badge of honor. But this band, on the cusp of being true cult legends on the scene, were about to weather their heaviest storm to date. And tragically, It was a storm that not all of Bayside's members would survive. October 2005, and Bayside were living the dream. At least, they were supposed to be living the dream. Locked into a grueling touring schedule after the release of the self-titled second album, the band were playing shows coast to coast and way beyond. It was exhausting. They'd just finished up a tour with Eye on the Avalanche at the beginning of the month, and straight away were out on the road again. This time with Silverstein, Spitalfield, and headliners Hawthorne Heights. Returning for the triumphant UK leg of that tour, the guys had 5 days off. Then they were back at it, as Aiden replaced Spitalfield for the next leg of the tour, kicking off in Indianapolis on October 27th. Then Sauget, Illinois the following night, Lawrence, Kansas the night after that, all the way through to December. No stopping, no rest, no time to catch a breath. But fate had other ideas. On Halloween 2005, as the band raced to the next show, their van hit a patch of ice outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, and flipped over. The accident was a devastating one. Bassist Nick Gambarian and drum tech Dan Marino suffered spinal fractures and needed surgery. Anthony Ranieri and Jack O'Shea were both hospitalized, along with Anthony's cousin Will Ranieri. But the most tragic blow of all was the untimely death of John Beats Holohan, who lost his life in the accident at the age of 31. The drummer left behind his wife, Amy Martin, and left his bandmates traumatized and consumed with grief. After canceling several dates while the band members recovered, Bayside had a decision to make. They could bring the whole project to an end, or they could keep going to honor their fallen friend. They chose the latter. Anthony and Jack rejoined the tour as an acoustic two-piece, and Bayside and their friends in other bands began selling merch for the John Holohan Bayside Memorial Fund. It was a touching gesture, but questions remained. After the loss of their close friend and core component of the band's sound, where could they go from there? How could they possibly continue? Anthony and Jack's acoustic renditions of Bayside songs were met by a rapturous response from audiences. This was a shared trauma, and the stripped-back nature of the acoustic set brought the emotional power of those songs to the fore. Meanwhile, the lack of a drummer on those tracks really underlined the magnitude of what had happened. John was gone, and the void he left behind weighed heavily on his friends, family, fans, and bandmates. Bayside released the acoustic EP in tribute to John the following year, featuring a couple of new songs, some acoustic versions of Bayside's favorites, and covers of Megan by the Smoking Popes and Baby Britain by Elliott Smith. It's an astonishingly powerful record, but it left no one any wiser as to what would happen next. Would the grief consume Bayside, or could they somehow keep making music together? When Chris Guglielmo joined on drums, it became clear that the band was indeed going to continue. In 2007, they released their third album, The Walking Wounded, with a title that was a clear nod to the physically and emotionally shattered nature of the band, and their need to keep on moving forwards. The album finds a battered and bruised Bayside in great form, considering the circumstances. Tracks like Duality are typically crunchy, indie-tinged versions of the band's classic punk emo, and the record went down like a storm with fans and critics alike. A remix of Duality even found its way onto the latest Resident Evil film, and made a lot of money for both Bayside and Victory Records in the process. Bayside were back, and were releasing great music in a tribute to their fallen friend. But how long could this go on for? Were the wounds of that traumatic night in Wyoming really healed? I think we should get something straight from the outset of this chapter. Of course, those wounds were not healed. Wounds like that never heal, not completely. A night of terror and confusion. A night that began with a group of friends all together, having the time of their lives, and ended with one of those friends gone for good. That's the kind of pain that people keep with them, their whole lives. Bayside weren't going to put that tragedy behind them. How could they? Instead, they were going to rise from the ashes and turn their pain into power. In 2008, Bayside went on tour with Alkaline Trio, during which they announced the release of their fourth LP, Shudder. Shudder is an excellent album, and one that actually sounds a little like Good Morning era Trio in places. Of course, it's unmistakably a Bayside album. Having Fun Storming the Castle is a gloriously riffy piece of post-hardcore, with a nice dash of metallic finger-tapping thrown in for good measure. What and What Not has a 90s emo sound to it, combining elements of Jimmy Eat World and Death Cab with a strong core of punk heft. It didn't sell quite as well as the previous album, but it was a big critical success, and truly cemented Bayside as the real unsung heroes of the scene. The band took a time out after Shudder, But they came back strong in 2011 with a new album and a new label. Shudder turned out to be the band's last LP for victory. Their new home was Wind Up Records, the New York-based label that had a distribution deal with EMI. Wind Up had previously put out massive records like Fallen by Evanescence and Creed's Weathered, so they had all the resources needed to push Bayside to the stars. In the end, it didn't quite work out like this. Fifth album, Killing Time, sold pretty well, and was Bayside's best-reviewed record to date, but it wasn't going to make Anthony Ranieri a household name like Amy Lee. By now, though, the guys probably didn't care about that. The trauma of the past few years had given them a new perspective on life. They had a lot to be thankful for. Plenty of fans, a string of great records, and a knack for writing pop post-hardcore banger after pop post-hardcore banger. The best way to honor John, and to stay true to themselves, was to just keep on keeping on. Keep on doing things their own way. Perhaps Wind Up were hoping for a little more, though. They didn't keep Bayside on the roster, and so the guys were left looking for another label. They found one in Hopeless Records. In many ways, this was the perfect fit for Bayside. Sure, the band liked to dabble in the grand and melodramatic, with cool Baroque vocals and stadium rock solos. But they're not Evanescence. They're not Creed. With Hopeless, they were among kindred spirits. This was the label that had put out albums by friends like Silverstein and the Wonder Years, as well as a whole host of other pop-punk and emo luminaries. The appropriately titled Cult, Bayside had become a real cult band by this point, might have been the group's first album for Hopeless, but it must have felt like a homecoming. In fact, Ranieri said it felt like it could be our last label, because Hopeless were so emotionally invested in their bands, no matter what situation the band was in. The album was another critical success, and the experience with Hopeless set them on a roll. In 2016, they launched their follow-up, Vacancy, another strong entry in what was rapidly becoming a sprawling back catalog. On Mary, the band teamed up with fellow emo legend Chris Carrabba to write a soaring piece of country and heartland rock-tinged emo. It's a triumphant piece of music that sounds more like Bruce Springsteen than Braid or Brand New. It really does seem like Bayside have found their forever home with Hopeless Records. This is a label that's willing to give the band total creative freedom. So, if they want to release a Weezer-esque piece of spiky indie rock like Medication on 2019's Interrobang album, they can. Hopeless were right there alongside them, backing them up every step of the way. And if they want to follow that up with a blistering return to post-hardcore form, like they did on 2024's There Are Worse Things Than Being Alive, they can do that too. No problem. Tracks like Castaway are among the heaviest things Bayside have ever recorded, but are delivered with Anthony's trademark rock and roll snarl. Bayside's resilience is something to be admired. While most bands would have caved and fallen apart after the tragedy of that October night, now 2 decades gone, Bayside did not. Instead, they've taken their place among emo's cult legends, forging a sound that's unmistakably their own. It's an incredible achievement. What are your memories of Bayside? And which track or album is your favorite? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe, and stick around for another story of tragedy and triumph in the world of pop punk, coming right up.